When the Trudeau Liberals began to push MAID, or the medically assisted induced death, we knew there were going to be problems. We knew there were going to be issues, and we knew that it probably would go way too far. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Jamil Jivani and Brian Lilley. You and Brian and many others at the Sun and Post Media have written extensively about MAID and the problems with it. Some benefits, but now the Liberal government looks like they are backing away a little bit from the extreme policy perspectives that have been taken. What do we know?
Well, what we know is that this has changed dramatically, I would say radically, since Justin Trudeau came into office in 2015. Initially, medical assistance in dying was presented as an option for people with terminal illnesses towards the end of their
Mm.
life, people who were on the brink of death, and this would be a way to ease their pain. And over the last 7, 8 years, it's evolved into something where now we see physicians in Quebec talking about offering MAID to 1-year-old toddlers who are sick. So it has been a dramatic change where it's a slippery slope that went from something that was supposed to be compassionate now being offered to children. Potentially, that's been on the table. The most recent change that they're looking at making in the spring was to extend it to adults with mental illness, including
Mhm.
potentially 18-year-olds who are battling with depression, anxiety, a number of other disorders. So the slippery slope aspect of this, how radically it's changed, putting Canada in the most extreme position of any country that we know of on these sorts of laws, being warned, the Trudeau Liberals being warned by psychiatrists, by physicians, that this would
Mm.
be going way too far. It's been a pretty dramatic news story to follow over the course of this year. And thankfully, it looks like and when I say we, I mean the bulk of the Canadian voices who are concerned about this from across the political spectrum have finally gotten through to the Trudeau Liberals, and they say now they want to slow down the radical changes and extend the timeline for making a decision on this in the spring. So maybe this means permanent good changes. It could just mean slowing down what has been a horrible process, but hopefully people are starting to think about this and what it means for our country.
Brian, you've written about members of the military, former members of the military, who have gone through the very challenging part of PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, and one of the options presented to them is, well, you could have MAID. This is one of the things that's on the table versus the hundreds of billions of tax dollars that is spent on multiple social services that can be offered. We have challenges in healthcare, we have challenges in social services, we have challenges everywhere. It just strikes me as disturbing that offering MAID seems to be the de facto go-to when vast majority of Canadians thought, okay, fourth, you're a stage 4 cancer patient, you're elderly, you have no other options. Those seem compassionate on compassionate grounds. It's gone way beyond that, Brian.
It really has. And Adrian, I was on Parliament Hill when politicians started talking about bringing this in through legislation. Eventually, it was imposed on us by the Supreme Court, a decision that came down before the 2015 election and said you've got to have legislation setting out parameters for this by a deadline. And I believe that deadline was early 2016. So the politicians that I remember the conversations with them at the time, people like Joe Martin of the NDP, very concerned about how far we would go with medical assistance in dying, saying he was worried that without proper palliative care in place, that seniors in nursing homes would be offered MAID to clear up bed space, that they would be told, well, you're blocking somebody else. Can we give you this? I don't think most people, whether they were supporters or opponents, thought that we would get to the point where we're talking about infants, as Jamil pointed out, or teenagers dealing with depression, or our military. And it's really disturbing. I interviewed Mark Menke for the Full Comment podcast as guest host, as both of you have done, guest hosting over at Full Comment. Mark Menke is a gentleman from Southern Alberta who's a veterans advocate, runs his own podcast about trauma recovery. And he has spoken to people who have been looked after by Veterans Affairs officials in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, who have all been offered medical assistance in dying. And he said, there's no way that this is just one person. This is now policy of the federal government and Veterans Affairs Canada. Thankfully, the Trudeau government looked at that and said, this is wrong. We need to examine it. But we have been going down the slippery slope, and the slippery slope has been greased up far worse than any of us expected.
Jamil, I'm going to give you the last word. I'm wondering, why is it that anyone that raises a red flag or presents an alternative position or opinion on a matter such as this, why are they chastised, castigated to the side? Why is it that we are so willing and ready and able to offer such a treatment, if you can even call it a treatment, to people who may just have, a bit of depression in their life, may just be unhappy? I mean, this is certainly, Jamil, a time of year when there is a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety amongst the citizenry. Why are we so easy and readily willing? Why is the medical community so willing to do this?
In my view, the medical assistance in dying issue, which really is a euphemism for euthanasia and suicide, exposes a weak spot in liberal ideology and the political left. It exposes that they are not the sole arbiters of compassion as they often like to present themselves. Often they like to position people who are in the center, people who are on the right, as not being as compassionate as them on the left. And the truth is that this shows that in many ways they've lost, I think, the plot on what compassion looks like, on what believing in human dignity looks like. For those who believe this is simply a matter of free choice and free will, we have seen many documented cases where there are people living with disabilities who have said, if the government was willing to help me get an appropriate place to live, if the government was able to help me get the treatment I need, if the government was able to help me get a job so I have a purpose in my life, I would not be considering medical assistance in dying. So we do know that this is a matter of compassion. And I think liberals get very uncomfortable when we point out that they're wrong on this one. They're wrong on many issues. They are not the only people who know what compassion looks like.
Yeah, very well said. Well, log on to Facebook and Twitter and go to the TorontoSun.com. Let us know what you think.